still on the highway, Route 66. We are now going to step into the next book in the line of the minor prophets, and I have a question for you. Does anyone know where to locate in Scripture the book of Amos? How many of you will honestly admit that you weren't sure that there was a book in the Bible called Amos? Yes, see, and Amos is an interesting book. Amos is an interesting character. Amos is an interesting man. He's very unique among the prophets, see, because he goes from absolutely beloved in Israel to utterly hated in Israel. It could kind of be described maybe like this. There was a wonderful woman named Gladys Dunn who decided one morning that she would visit one of the other churches in town. She wanted to hear the new preacher, and so she went to this church, and she sat, and she listened, and she enjoyed it. And after the service was over, everybody proceeded to get up, and she turned to the person next to her and stuck her hand out to introduce herself, since she wasn't regular there, and said, "Hi, I'm Gladys Dunn." And the person replied, "I'm glad he's done too." That's kind of how Amos felt in the midst of all of this. And this is how the people felt about Amos and his message to them. Because before he was in this position, he was extremely popular. See, that's the interesting thing about Amos. Our not-so-famous Amos was not the son of a prophet. He didn't come from the school of prophets. This was not what his calling in life was. He was a businessman. He was a farmer. But God pulled him from the comfort of his business and stuck him out on the street corner and said, "You're going to tell them everything they're doing wrong." And the problem was his negative news wasn't going to be popular at all, because at this point in time, everybody was so optimistic. Because the market was booming and everything was on its way up. Everybody was thrilled and in a great place in life. But Amos, he speaks out to this. "I was no prophet, nor a prophet's son. I was a herdsman. The Lord took me from following the flock and said to me, 'Go, prophesy to my people Israel.'" Okay, straight up, how are you going to feel in that position? Donnie, you're sitting at your desk at Pioneer and you hear God say, "Hey, no more internet. I need you to go prophesy to my people." John, how about you? You guys, if you're pulled from your business and God says, "Guess what? You're going to go prophesy and tell people everything they're doing wrong." I don't think it's a real comfortable position to be in, especially when you're going, whoa. I'm not the son of a priest. I'm not the son of a prophet. What are you talking about? That's not my calling. I'm sure you can find somebody else. I mean, look, God, is there really anything wrong? The economy's great. God goes, "Yeah, but at its foundation, it's rotten." At its foundation, it's rotten because of how it's gotten to that point. See, the nation of Israel, as well as all its surrounding nations, they were full of social injustice, hypocrisy, oppression, greed, and arrogance. The big shots in the community were taking full advantage of all of those who were less fortunate and poor. They were cheating them. They were enslaving them. And Amos was called to deliver the news about this despite the fact that he would be hated. God will come like a mighty warrior. He's going to judge those nations who rebelled against him. Even his own people aren't safe, man. And Israel is not immune to what is coming. But Israel on the other side, God says, "I'm going to eventually restore you." Maybe Amos's message could be summarized in this way. How people treat people matters to God. How people treat people matters to God. It's because people matter to God, right? Every person bears his image. It kind of flows like this. You see the first two chapters come out, and this is 7 prophecies of judgment that are against the other surrounding nations. God comes out and he points his finger toward these surrounding nations, and he basically declares, "You are sinful and evil. The social injustice on you. You do this on people that you deem who are lower than you, and it's abhorrent that you're doing this. You run them over, you mistreat them, you're sadistic, you're cruel, you take advantage of everything, and you target the innocent people." But he doesn't stop there. Then he points to Judah. The first section of his appeal, he says, guess what? You're guilty too. You guys, you're bribing everybody. You're extorting people, and you're manipulating the entire system for your own desires. Now here's the funny thing. Israel, meanwhile, sitting there, listening to Amos talk about the surrounding nations in Judah, and they're agreeing with him. At this point, they got smiles on their faces. Not only that, they're applauding. They're standing ovations for Amos at this point. They're going, yeah, you tell him, that's right. And then you get to chapters 3 through 6 and the 7 sermons of judgment on Israel, and Amos turns and he goes, Israel, you guilty too. And that's the instant where they go from loving him to somebody get him off that platform and out of this city. And Amos is saying, you guys have got this backwards. See, God's design is to love people and use things. You guys have flipped it. You're loving things and you're using people. It doesn't add up. Amos came charging into town like Clint Eastwood or John Wayne, like a gunslinger in the Old West, saying, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to get justice for God. And as he speaks, he's looking at two different kinds of people. Out of this eye and looking over here, he sees what's known as the beautiful people. You know, the rich, the famous, the powerful, the influential. But then he looks over here and he sees the downtrodden, those who are struggling, who are poor, who are weak, the servants. And he sees both of them, these two different people. He sees those who are creating the injustice as well as those who are suffering the injustice. And in his message, he declares to them, he looks and he says, this day is not going to end. You will not see the end of this day because God's judgment is here and it's going to rain down upon you like fire. And when it does, there's going to be hell to pay and you're going to be left with nothing. It's all going away. And in no uncertain terms, Amos stands on the street corner and declares, prepare to meet your God, big shot. God will have his justice on your social injustice. And he follows that up, though, with part 3. 5 visions of judgment, a clarification, as well as 2 messages that are the promises of God's restoration. Amos was set up to have a very daunting task. His words came to them in a time where accountability had basically dropped in the position that Israel had been given. And it was very, very lacking in what they were doing. So Amos had to remind them. He had to bring back that accountability and tell them about it. And he had to remind them, and to take a quote from the movie Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. They needed that reminder that when you're in a higher place and when God gives you more power, more financial strength, and he brings you to a point of more responsibility, you have a greater responsibility to do it right. You're expected to do it differently. Amos had to make it rain down specifically on Israel because they were the people of God. They were the example, the ones that were supposed to be setting the difference. There was an expectation in that because they were the people of God. And God declared that to them. In chapter 3, he says, you only have I known of all the families of the earth. Therefore I will punish you for all your iniquities. I don't know. It's not necessarily a wonder that Amos became kind of unpopular, that after his message was delivered, they weren't really a big fan of him. And his message, God's declaration, Amos's position, everything comes from the very start in chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. The words of Amos, who was among the shepherds of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel. The Lord roars from Zion. Anybody ever heard the roar of the Lord? I think we hear the roar of the Lord every time it thunders. Thunder is the voice of God. And God would roar through Amos. And he would roar first by saying that he hates social injustice. God hates social injustice, especially in his own people. And the examples that are in this book are absolutely astounding. This is honestly kind of mind-blowing at times, what's revealed. The dishonesty and the oppression that we see in the book of Amos, it's flabbergasting. Chapter 2, verses 6 and 7. I will not relent from punishing Israel, because they sell a righteous person for silver, and a needy person for a pair of sandals. They trample the heads of the poor on the dust of the ground and block the path of the needy. What? God takes it further. This is crazy. Chapter 4, verse 1. Listen to this message, you cows of Bashan, who are on the hill of Samaria, women who oppress the poor and crush the needy, who say to their husbands, bring us something to drink. Hey, God, don't mince your words or anything. He just called the women cows. Cows. He's calling out everything here. Those who snap their fingers, who desire selfish service, the beautiful people that think everything should just be handed to them, or those that think everything should be free anyway because I'm just entitled to everything and I deserve everything to be handed to me on a silver platter because I'm just special that way. Side note, ladies, let me ask you, if you were sitting in one room and you snapped your fingers at your husband and said, bring me something to drink, what do you think the reaction would be? I mean, some of us might be like, yes, dear, I love you, and we're willing to do it, but I mean, it might come across a little. And this process wasn't just a here and there thing for Israel and the surrounding nations. This was a consistent, intentional sin that just kept going on and on and on. And instead of, it was this idea of, you're not caring for the needy, God says. You're trampling upon them. Instead of providing for the poor and looking out for those less fortunate than you, you're taking more from them. You bribe the judge in court so that they will accuse and sentence the innocent. Everything is backwards. Thus the key verse, Amos 4:12. Therefore, Israel, prepare to meet your God. I don't know how Israel's feeling at the time, but if I had somebody come to me and say that, I'm saying I'm scared and I'm shaking in my boots. I think it's scary. Now, America, United States, we're not God's chosen people like Israel, okay? That's not it. But we do need to know the practical application here to where we're sitting right now as a society and where we're sitting with the church. How many of us have ever traveled to another country? How many of you ever traveled in like a mission-style purpose to another country? Been to Mexico. I know many people that have been down to Mexico and served there. For me, I spent a lot of time going to the Dominican Republic. And I can tell you right now, and I'm sure some of you could attest to this, if they were offered the opportunity to live here and live in the way that we do, they'd switch places with us in a heartbeat. Without question. You know, one of the interesting things that I see in the Dominican, there are, the poor neighborhoods with the shack-style homes and everything, but when you get into those upper neighborhoods, because in a lot of those countries, there's still a lot of social injustice. You see these nicer homes, but here's the interesting thing. They have high walls or giant iron fences, locked gates, privacy gates. So many of these, you can't even see the yard. You can't hardly even see the house. All you see is the roof. Why? Thieves. If they can access it, they will get in and they will steal. And the police in these countries, too. The law enforcement, They'll force bribery out of people even if they haven't done anything wrong. Oh, well, I'll write you up for this, or I'll take you to jail for this, but you can get out of it if you'll pay me this. Honestly, it makes me really thankful knowing the things I've seen and the things that I've experienced in those places. I'm thankful for this country. It's not that we don't have our own social injustice. We're littered with it. I mean, for 90 plus years of our history, we enslaved people. And today, now, let's be honest, what he's jumping at here with the material needs, we're overwhelmed by that today. Our material needs and those ideas, our society puts that above everything else. Get more, get more, get more, never satisfied. Greed and power are the God that most people serve. And we manipulate and we take advantage of those who have less in order to try and gain more for ourselves. That is social injustice. Maybe think about this. Those that some people may deem lower than themselves. The server at the restaurant you go to for lunch. The hotel maid that cleans up and gives you turn-down service. The school janitor. Let me ask you, how do you treat those people? How do you look at those people? How do you view those people? I think of good old Dr. Seuss. A person is a person, no matter how small. How about celebrities and big-time sports figures? So many of them, at times, they'll just ignore their fans. Or how about the ones that they did, someone wants an autograph. Sure, $50. What? You're making millions of dollars? The guy wants an autograph, but you want to charge him for it? Who do you think you are? Or that kid that just wants a simple picture with his sports hero, but they get frustrated because the kid just keeps bugging them. Really? They forget, and we forget at times, what God has said and made known. Every person, no matter their position, matters to God. And there's a quote that's attributed to multiple sources, so I'm not going to attribute it to one particular person, because this is attributed to multiple people, and I'm not sure who it actually was, but here we go. You can easily judge the character of a man by how he treats those who can do nothing for him. That stings. That stings. But I think it's something that we need to hear in the U.S. More importantly, and really sad, I think we need to hear it in the church. I think we desperately need to hear this in the church. Simple illustration with this. Dave Ramsey, he says, hey, you got money to eat out? You got money to tip appropriately. If you can afford to pay for that meal, you can afford to tip the person serving it to you. Period. And I can attest to this from firsthand experience. I'll tell you right now, if you've ever waited tables, you might know this. What's the one day during the week that servers hate to be on the schedule? Sundays. Nobody wants to serve the church crowd. Why? Because it's the most common crowd that either stiffs or shortchanges the tip. That's sad. That's really sad. More importantly right now, I don't think we can get through the idea of social injustice this morning without addressing, kind of thinking back to the Dr. Seuss quote and addressing this, a person is a person no matter how small. Born or unborn. Abortion is one of the biggest social injustices of our time. And there's a heated battle right now as they're trying to overturn Roe versus Wade, and by golly, I think it's probably going to happen. I can tell you right now, I know that there may be some ruffled feathers, but you know what? I don't care, because I'm standing on this. You cannot find me a place in this book where God is okay with that. You want to argue with me about it? Go right ahead. I'll stand and listen to it, but you will not change my mind, because you're not going to find anything in here that says otherwise. And anybody that thinks that, well, God and I've had a conversation, we're okay with it. That's not the voice of God. I'm sorry, that's just truth. Abortion's wrong. End of story. It's because of that. It's because that God is holy. We know that He hates the social injustice in those people, but He will punish that social injustice as well. And He is not above doing it in His own people. Because we're the ones called to be different. And He will take care of things with us to set us straight in the accountability. He is a fierce warrior and creator God that is against social injustice. Amos 4:13, for behold, He who forms the mountains and creates the wind and declares to man what is his thought, who makes the morning darkness and treads on the heights of the earth. The Lord, the God of hosts, is His name. He is holy God. And in the end, when it all comes to fruition, He says that only integrity is going to be payoff. Only godlike character will be able to win in the end. He says, in that day I will raise up the booth of David that is fallen and repair its breaches, that they may possess all the nations who are called by my name. I will restore the fortunes of my people Israel, and they shall rebuild the ruined cities and inhabit them. I will plant them on their land, and they shall never again be uprooted out of the land that I have given them. He will punish, but He will restore when there is repentance and a turn back to Him. So how about that message of Amos? How people treat people matters to God. Here's the funny thing. Israel was actually fine with that at first, right? When Amos first started, they're going, yeah, absolutely, that is correct. Preach it. We're fine with it too. We hear it, yes. Until the finger gets turned and pointed at us and says, you too. Israel's fine with it. We're fine with it. As long as it applies to everybody else and not us. It's kind of like the young preacher that decided he was going to do a 5-part series on sin. And so he got up there the first week and he talked about drunkenness. And everybody lauded it and said, yes, horrible thing, shouldn't happen, it's a sin. And they told him afterwards how great the message was. He got into week 2 and he talked about addiction. And again, they lauded it and said, yes, excellent message, preacher. The third week, he talked about abortion. Hey, amens, yes, it's sin. And in the fourth week, he got up and he talked about stealing and thievery. And they said, yes, absolutely. And in the final week, he got up there and he started to talk about gossip. And after service, everyone got up and left silently. Except for one lady that approached him and said, you've done it now, Pastor. You're done preaching and now you've started meddling. But see, that's exactly what happened to Amos when he told Israel, you guys got to stop and think about your own guilt here, your own social injustice that you're dealing with. You can't just sit here and applaud things for the surrounding nations or for Judah. You can't work on the plank in their eye until you remove the speck from your own. You can't work on the speck that you think's in their eye without removing the plank from your own. You're guilty of taking advantage of people too. Those who are less fortunate than you, weaker than you. I'll tell you what, I'm thankful for this church family because I think there's a giant heart in here for social injustice. I think we prove that. I think there are a lot of things that we do that maybe we don't look at it in that capacity, but it really is. It is a fight against social injustice. Free giveaway. Our ties to the Ministerial Alliance and everything that they do and the way we support that. Going down to Mexico and taking care of things there and helping out. Partnering with people like Destiny Rescue and other organizations to help stop the idea of human trafficking. Or working with Journey Center and supporting them and seeing these people and these men change from addiction to Jesus and find new life. How great it is when those God has blessed take what He's given them and use it for His purpose and mission. You know what God does in that time? He rejoices because He loves it. He loves it. But on the other side, when it's used for selfish means, and when it manipulates and takes advantage, when it's used in a way that's, yeah, we'll do this, but I'm expecting this in return. See, he doesn't like that, not one bit. I love what John Ortberg said. Every human being you ever see was made in the image of God. So we're never to look at another person without having a sense of awe and reverence that says, this is one in whom God may dwell. I had an issue one time with a man that drove me nuts. The way he talked, the way he acted, the way he presented himself, everything that he would respond to in certain situations. It's just frustrating and annoying. And I had a conversation with a mentor of mine named Corey, and I said, Corey, I don't know how to deal with this guy. He's driving me nuts. And he looked at me and said, Luke, it's so simple. I go, how do you say it's so simple? He said, do you have Jesus? I said, yeah. He goes, does he have him? I go, no. He said, there's the missing piece, brother. The only difference between you and him, you have that relationship and he doesn't. And if you shine the light of that relationship, maybe he'll find it. The only difference between us and them is Jesus. If you start to see others as made in the image of God, because whether you've accepted that relationship or not, we know, male and female, He created them. He created them in His image. You start to see and treat everyone differently. You start to see and treat everybody with the love of Jesus that God desires us to do. And He says in chapter 8 through Amos, behold, I'm setting a plumb line in the midst of my people Israel. He says, I'm putting a check in place for the balance, for the alignment to the center, to see if you're there. Because it's not about the display of the cross that's around your neck. It's not about that Bible verse on the canvas that you hang on the wall in your house. It's not about some fish-based bumper sticker or that church t-shirt that you're wearing. Truly, it's a plumb line. It's all about the alignment of your living. Like James says, you don't just listen to what's in here, you do it. And we live in a country and a society now that basically has dismissed the idea that there is any absolute standard that exists. There is no plumb line to them anymore. It's just to do what feels good for you. The truth is, God is trying to speak to those who would know otherwise. I'm dropping that test line to see how close you are to the center. I want to see how willing you are to meet that standard, to work toward what you know is morally correct. Because if you are, I will use you in immense and powerful ways. He says in chapter 5, verse 24, but let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never failing stream. This is what God desires. He says, I desire this in you, in your life, in church, in work, in home, in marriage, in relationships, in friendships, in your family. I want to see this happening. This is the way it was meant to be. In all situations, you need to be fighting for the poor, the innocent, the weak. I put you in place so that justice can flow on like a river. Righteousness can be a never-failing stream. You are different. I made you that way. And God hates social injustice when it's in His own people, immensely more when it's own people. And He will not fail to punish us if we don't take care of it. So what are you going to do about it? I wonder, where will you be positioned when you're called out and you're told, prepare to meet your God?